first things first. If you don't have a stocking pattern, you get to make one. And if you've never actually made a pattern before, this will be fun. So all you really need to do is draw around a stocking if you have one, or even just draw a stocking shape. I actually had a stocking that I liked the size and shape of, so I just traced around it. And for context, I am making this stocking for my son. He picked out the fabrics that he wanted me to use. Well, he picked out the main fabric and the cuff fabric, and I picked out everything else. And I have been itching to get my sewing machine out again and really make something in 3D as opposed to in the digital and 2D platform that I've been doing. So I was happy that he wanted me to make a stocking and that he chose the fabric. So I didn't have to think about that part. If you're making your pattern like I am, remember to add the seam allowance once you get the size and shape down. So I'm just going around and I'm adding 1/2 inch little dots and lines around the entire pattern to add that seam allowance. If you already have a pattern, it probably already has one included, but just make sure, and make sure that you know what the seam allowance is. That would be important. And once the seam allowance has been added, you cut it out, and guess what? You just made a pattern. Congratulations! And now it's time to use the pattern. Fold your lining fabric right sides together and place the pattern on top and just cut around it. I'm using a horribly dull rotary blade. I do not recommend that. Use a sharp blade. It is so much easier. Also, you can pin your pattern to the fabric. I just don't like doing it. I feel like it buckles the fabric. So I just hold it down and try to go as smoothly and cleanly as possible. Once you have the lining pieces cut out, do the same thing for the main fabric. Put right sides together, place the pattern on top, and cut around it. You can see I switched to my shears, which were much easier and much sharper. You also might notice I have cans on top. Those are in place of pattern weights. I don't have pattern weights, so I just look for things that are heavy that will hold the fabric down so it doesn't shift while I cut around it. Once it's all cut, you'll have 2 lining pieces and 2 main fabric pieces. Take those over to the sewing machine and with the right side still together, sew all the way around using your seam allowance around the sides of the stocking, but leaving the top open. I used these little clips to keep the main fabric pieces together because it has stripes and I wanted to make sure that they lined up as close as possible when I turn them right side out. And the reason I don't use pins is because they hurt when you get stuck with them. And literally every time that I've used pins in the past when I have sewn something, I get stuck by one of them. So I use these clips instead. Now that they are sewn together, you want to make these little triangle cuts along the toes and the heels of the stocking pieces. You cut these little triangles almost all the way up to the sewing line, but being very careful not to actually cut the sewing line or the seam line because that would be bad and you'd have a hole in your stocking. But you make these little triangles on the toe and the heel wherever there's like an outer curve, because what that does is once you turn it right side out, it allows those curves to lay nice and smooth instead of being puckered because there's too much fabric. Now you don't have to do it on the lining pieces. I did it because I thought it would be easier for you to see with the lining fabric as opposed to the shiny main fabric. So again, you just cut these little triangles going as close to the seam as you can on both the toe and the heel. And where the curve goes inwards, you don't really need to do this, but I was just showing you, you could just make little straight lines. And again, that allows those curves to lie nice and smooth. Once those cuts have been made, take the main fabric stocking and turn it right side out. And you can either iron it or just use your fingers to kind of make it lie flat and make sure those curves are nice and smooth. Leave the lining the way it is, don't turn it right side out, and put it inside of the main stocking. Then you're going to line up the front and the back seam, either pin it or clip it, and using your seam allowance, just go ahead and sew the top together. And now it's time to make the cuff. So normally when I sew things and I'm making patterns, I'm very precise and I take measurements to make sure everything is exact. But faux fur is very forgiving. And so I just kind of wrapped it around the top of the stocking and eyed a 1/2 inch seam allowance, decided the length that I wanted, and drew the line on the backing of the faux fur. If you are going to use faux fur, here's a little tip. When you are cutting it, don't cut from the front of the fur. First of all, you wouldn't be able to see the line. Second of all, this is real-time speed now, how slowly I am cutting. You want to try and cut just the backing if you can. And what it does is it leaves a nice little length of fur that just makes it look much more natural. Then we're going to sew the short sides of the cuff together, so you do need to give your faux fur a little haircut, about a 1/2 inch in. It reduces a lot of the bulk for the sewing machine. Yes, it's messy, but it's really worth it. At this point, I forgot that I needed something to hang my stocking with. So I just cut out a length of grosgrain ribbon, folded it in half, and sent it through the machine. Then I went back to the cuff, put the short sides together, and just sewed it down the seam allowance. And now we get to put it all together. You take your loop, put it upside down, and line it up with the back seam of the stocking. And then you take your cuff and, matching the seam against seam, make sure that the fur is facing toward the lining of the stocking, like how you see it here. And that the direction that the fur is going is pointing down towards the bottom of the stocking. If you're also using faux fur and you feel like the cuff is just not going to fit, it's too big and it's starting to pucker, never fear. Like I said, faux fur is very, very forgiving, and it's okay to just manhandle it and maneuver it and push it around until it fits and keep it held in place by pins or clips. And now just sew around the top. I went back and forth over this back seam a couple of times just to reinforce it, since that is where the weight of the stocking is going to be held with that loop. And then you just go all the way around. And now the moment of truth. Turn that cuff right side out, and if you did it right, we have a complete stocking. And this could actually be where you stop. It's done. Or you can add decorations. I didn't really know what I was going to do. I just knew that I found these pieces that I thought looked good with the fabric, and I knew I wanted to add bells, because Christmas. I felt like bells and Christmas go together. So I grabbed my hot glue gun and just started playing around, putting things together and seeing if I liked the way it turned out. If you've made it this far in the video and you're still here, I just wanted to say thank you. And I'd love to know more about you, so leave a comment. Tell me what your favorite holiday tradition is. It doesn't have to be Christmas. Not everybody celebrates Christmas, but what do you do for the holiday season? What holiday do you celebrate? And what's your favorite tradition? Let's get to know each other more. And I'm finally happy with how everything is looking, so I decided to hot glue it to the stocking instead of sewing it. Normally I would sew it, but hot glue is fine too. And I'm actually really happy with how this turned out. It was fun to do. It felt good to do something with my hands other than drawing, and my son really liked it. So yay! Brand new stocking, custom made. And here it is with all the other stockings hanging up. What do you think? Okay, thanks, bye!